Hello, my friends, and welcome into week 7 of our Foundations course. This is our 10-week series going into the top 10 things that every Catholic needs to know about their faith. Tonight, we are having a part 2 from last week on Christian living, primarily the virtues, how we grow in them, and how we live a life of virtue. So we're going to go through the theological virtues, the cardinal virtues, and then some of the things that hold us back from growing in virtue and the best ways that we can grow in virtue. I hope that this session is enlightening for you and maybe even a little bit challenging for you. So as we are all on this journey to grow closer to Christ, I hope that today's session helps you do just that. If you enjoyed today's session, please hit subscribe so that you do not miss any of the rest of our sessions, our final 3 weeks over the next 3 weeks. And as always, you can go back and watch every session in our Foundations playlist on the Forte Catholic YouTube channel. Enjoy today's session. Cool. So we are going to continue on kind of a part 2 of our virtues in Christian living. And I would imagine that I was, as I was preparing for today, I was like, this kind of seems like it's be like one of those homilies or one of those talks where you're like, oh yeah, I've heard those words before, and you'll might want to glaze your eyes over, right? But as because we're talking about faith, hope, love, like these are like the main themes of Christianity. You've all heard a ton about them, but even as I was going through our prep today, I was like seeing things and seeing connections that I hadn't seen before. So I hope that this is something that's helpful for all of us to essentially, the whole goal of this is to grow as better disciples of Christ. And to do that, we need to be more like him. So we're going to look at him, the things that he calls us to. So we're going to hop right in. The 3 theological virtues. Who knows them? I just said them. Faith, hope, and love. There you go. The 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and love. Love's often seen as charity. We often associate charity with like donating money or whatever. But they come from the same root word, caritas. So caritas was the word for love. So if you hear that, it's not conflating loving with loving your neighbor doesn't always just mean giving them 10% of your income or whatever. It means the full self-gift that we see on the cross, right? So by faith we believe in God, by hope we cling to God, and by charity we love God. I love how simple that was made. I'll say it again. By faith we believe in God, by hope we cling to God, and by charity we love God. The first and the third seem pretty basic, but that image of clinging, I have young kids, so they'll come and cling to me. They'll grab on my leg and they'll hold on to my leg. I was standing with, I don't know if y'all have met Sam Schoenfelder yet at the parish, but I was standing next to him after Mass, and we talked for like 30 minutes. My kids and his kids were playing. My wife's talking to his wife, and I was talking to him. We had a good conversation after Mass, and every couple of minutes, his kids would come and just like grab onto his leg and then walk off, right? They didn't need anything. They didn't want it. It's not like they were like, can we leave? Like, it was none of that, right? It was just, they'd come and cling onto his leg. It's like, oh, he's still here. And they'd go back and play like on the side of the church, right? And so I saw that yesterday, and we kind of made a joke about it because I was like, they only love the left side of him because none of them hugged his right leg. It was just like this weird phenomenon that only I observed. And I pointed it out, and it was just very funny. It was the kids were over there anyway. It was this whole thing. But that idea of clinging, right? Kids cling to their parents. And that theological virtue of hope, of like clinging on to God, like holding on. Like, one, the kids wanted to know that they were safe, that dad was still there, all those things, right? And they were in a safe environment. But when kids are scared, they cling a little tighter, right? And I think of the 3 theological virtues, hope is the one that I personally struggle with the most. So having that idea of like, even when everything's falling apart, I'm clinging to the Father. These three theological virtues are the basis for a life lived according to the Father's plan. They dispose us for an eternal life of the Trinity and are thus necessary for salvation. They are undeserved gifts. How do we receive the theological virtues? We cannot do anything on our own merit to get them. They're an unmerited, undeserved gift, right? We've heard that before, right? Grace. We receive them at the same time that we receive the biggest influx of grace at baptism. So whenever we get baptized, we are infused with grace. and we are infused with the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. They're the foundation for the moral life. So everything that we talked about last week and like the cardinal virtues and all the things that we're going to talk about throughout the day, the bedrock of our spiritual life, of our moral life is, are we being faithful? Are we loving? And are we hopeful, right? All the other stuff kind of builds on that foundation. You think of a house, right? The foundation is not the most exciting part, but to have all the rest of the stuff, we have to have that solid foundation of faith, hope, and love. They are grown and developed in human hearts by our cooperation with the promptings of the Holy Spirit. I was listening to this, I forget the name of the book now, I'm blanking on it, but it was essentially this idea, and it was talking about, again, young parents and how, you and your spouse are laying in bed, the baby cries in the other room or in the corner of the room or whatever, you both hear it. You're both awake. And you're both pretending that you don't hear it and that you're still asleep, right? So it's this whole idea that like we have the prompt, like we all, whenever we wake up, our first thought might be, oh, I'm awake again. But pretty quickly the thought is, I should get up and fix this, right? But then we're like, oh no, I'm tired. Maybe they'll cry themselves asleep, or oh, I did it last time, or oh, I went to work today and my wife stayed home, she can do it, or whatever. Like we can start thinking all these things pretty quickly, right? Whenever we knew the right thing to do. We knew in our head without even thinking about it, in the midst of that like barely awake fog, right? The half asleep, half awake. Like we might be a little grumpy at first, but we're like, oh, I should get up and go do this. And then we start adding on all the other things that reasons why we don't need to do it, right? That's a silly example, but the cooperations with the Spirit. Because the Spirit is telling us the right thing to do. Now that's a very kind of silly example, right? But things like that build a good marriage, right? When we have these promptings of like, hey, I know what the right thing to do is, and then we can throw up a bunch of different things of like, oh, I shouldn't do this because X, Y, and Z, or I'm tired, or I'm, the whole halt thing, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or I did the good thing yesterday, like I don't need to do it today. Like we can put all these things in front, but like how we grow in these virtues is just answering the invitation of the Spirit. Because these three gifts are the gifts that are given to us without merit. The only way we can grow in them is answering those promptings when they come to act out faith, hope, and love. Okay, so let's get into each one individually. We're going to talk about faith. It's the root of the supernatural life. God offers the gift of faith to all, and it is ours to accept or reject. So this gift of faith, again, faith isn't something that I'm just doing. It is a gift that's been given to me that I'm participating in. Whenever we talk to kids, I have horror stories of my junior high dance. If a lot of y'all have had junior high kids, and the junior high dances are terrible, right? If there was a junior high dance in here, all the boys would be lined up against that wall, yes. All the girls would be lined up against that wall, yes. And all the guys would be like, "Hey, go ask her to dance," and all the girls would be like, like all this stuff over in the corner, and it's like nobody does anything, right? That's right. But what happens when one guy has the gumption to get up and go ask? Hopefully she says yes, because if not, that would be hundreds of thousands of dollars of trauma and therapy and all that stuff. But it happened. It happened at my junior high dance. All my friends were coercing me, and they knew I liked this girl, and they finally forced me. I mean, this is after like an hour. I don't want to be the hero of the story. There's no heroes in this story. This junior high. But I walked across. I asked her to dance. She said yes. And then what happened? Everybody else started coming to dance, right? So I use that imagery in my head, especially when I'm talking to kids, a lot of like, it is so much harder to be the first person, right? But what faith is we get to be everybody else. Like this is just something that we just get to join into, right? God is the person who lit the spark. God was the person that walked across the room first. The analogy starts to fall apart a little bit, right? But God is the first mover. God's the first actor, where we're not being like, hey, there's this God and I should have faith in him. I should believe in him. I should trust him. I should love him. He has made the first action. He has made it easier, right? As hard as it is for that one kid to start walking across, that's what God did. And we're a part of the group that just gets to be like, oh, somebody else led the way and we get to participate in this. Faith is more certain than acquired human knowledge, while faith and reason are always in agreement because God is the source of both. So sometimes people like to put, faith versus science, or faith versus other ways that we can acquire knowledge, right? But all science does is study creation, right? And who created creation? God, right? So we are always like faith. We can learn new things about faith. You're literally here at a place where we're learning more about our faith, right? And we mentioned this on I think the first night or maybe the second night about mystery, right? A mystery is something that we can know a lot about, but not everything about, right? So to help us to have deeper faith and be able to sustain faith, knowledge is helpful, but it can never be the full thing because we can never fully understand how God became man and died for us and now becomes bread and it's three persons in one. Like we can never fully understand that, right? We can learn about it. It can help our faith, but at some point we have to take that step of this is why it says that faith is more certain than human knowledge, because there are places where we lack human knowledge, and God has the answers there. Reason prepares us for faith and helps us to see the reasonableness of faith. There was a kid in my youth group. He actually just got married. I thought he was going to become a priest, but I was wrong. He just got married a couple months ago, but he was in my youth group many, many years ago, and he is the smartest person I think I've ever talked to. Like IQ level, just incredible. And he was like 16, 17, 18 whenever I was working with him, right? And I would get asked questions in grad school theology classes were easier than answering the questions that he would ask at like after youth group, right? So, and because he kind of knew that his questions were kind of like out there or whatever, he'd save them just for me. Like everybody else had left, and it's 9 o'clock, and from 9 to 10 o'clock, sitting outside the parking lot waiting for his mom to come pick him up. He's asking me these questions. I'm like, I'm exhausted, buddy. Like I can't do this right now. But he's very brilliant. He ended up becoming a Catholic missionary. I thought he was going to be a priest. He was a missionary for the last few years. Just ended his time doing that. And he got married. He's going to go on to his further his career. But I think him more than any other person that I've ever encountered, like came to God first through reason. I think most people it's through faith, experience. It's what our parents taught us, and then the reason kind of comes along the longer that we are around. But for him, he was just completely out on a reasonable level. And then it struck for reason. And then once he said yes because he had enough reason, the gift of faith was very much, not given because he had been baptized, but very much came alive in his life, right? Faith is not a blind leap. A lot of times people will say that, right? It's a blind leap of faith to believe in God. But like we mentioned earlier, like we mentioned quite a few times, it's like we have a ton of knowledge, proofs of God's existence, the history of salvation, all the church's teachings for 2,000 of years, right? It's not this blind leap. It's this like, it would like, if you want to take the leap analogy, it's like, you're going up with a professional, bungee jumper or whatever. And they've trained you and they've prepped you. And then you could take the bungee jump. It's not a blind leap. Somebody knew how to do this. Somebody created a rope that could do it. Like there was all these things in place, but at some point you do still have to take that little step, right? Okay, ways that we can lose our faith. We've talked about losing faith a few times as we've gone through with questions and that sort of thing. The only way we can lose faith is through a deliberate choice. And that deliberate choice can look a few different ways. One is persistence in the ignorance of God and his revelations or indifference to him, right? So we probably all, I would imagine we all, as I go through these, we all probably have somebody in our family or our life that we can kind of think about and be like, oh yeah, like I've seen that before. So it's this persistent ignorance of God as revelation of like, I have decided what the church teaches and I'm not going to learn any more about it, right? We joke all the time that like the worst people on the internet, like whenever it comes to like faith arguments, if you start a faith argument with, I went to Catholic school for 8 years, it's the quickest way to make people not listen to you, right? Because it's like, if that's the last thing that you're saying, it's like, okay, how many years ago was that? So you're telling me that your knowledge is the knowledge of a 18-year-old that probably didn't pay attention much, right? So it's just this idea of I have stopped learning. I don't really care what God has to say or what the church has to say. I'm going to decide my truth, right? Misplaced priorities, which is very interesting because that makes it seem like it's not a deliberate choice. But I think, I don't just think this, I know this from studies of why people have left the faith. Most people, a lot of people in church have assumptions. It's like, oh, people in church left the church because the church's stance on abortion, or people left the church because the church's stance on gay marriage or whatever. Or whatever, we might think what the number one answer is. But like the large majority of people that leave, just kind of, they didn't have any connection to the church, and they just kind of stopped, they just drifted away. They were going every week, and then they missed once a month for a year, and they missed 2 a month for a year, and they missed 3 a month for a year, and then they went a few times a year, and then they were just like, why am I even doing this? I don't care about this at all, right? So it seems like that's a non-deliberate choice, but that choice was a deliberate choice over and over and over again, right? I think it's one of those, I think it's one of the scariest things about like why people are leaving faith, right? It's just that slow drip of not paying attention to and not striving for holiness and community and knowledge and that sort of thing. Choosing to be influenced by bad examples of some believers. This is another big one for people. Why do I not want to be a person of faith? It's like, oh, because that person of faith, that bishop, that leader, that person in our church, I have to sit next to this hypocrite every week. It's like stuff like that, right? And I do what? Choosing to be influenced by the bad example of some believers. Yeah. So it's a hard one. It's one of the hard ones for me. Just especially like working in the church, I get to see the not so great side of the church, right? And it's hard. And I've seen it affect my faith, but it takes time to kind of work through the idea that like my faith isn't in these people, it's in God. And like even when there are the quote unquote bad apples, right? Ultimately, just like creation, we talked about that. God created it and saw that it was good, right? God created his church and saw that it was good, even when there were bad people, bad leaders, whatever, right? And then there's the easy one, just outright revoking God and being like, I don't want anything to do with this, right? But no matter what, it is a deliberate choice. Now, what about the deliberate choice to increase in faith? How do we increase in a virtue that is a gift? We ask. That's the easy one. With these theological virtues, it's going to be a consistent theme. We ask. We'll get to it when we get to the cardinals. The cardinal virtues are human virtues that God can infuse and make better. So we can put in some quote-unquote work and strive in the virtues, right? By things like fasting. We talked about that a little bit last week, right? That's us putting some effort in. But for faith, hope, and love, these things that are gifts from God, ask the Holy Spirit in prayer for an increase in faith, an increase in hope, an increase in love. Participating devoutly and frequenting the sacraments, especially Eucharist and confession. This one I liked a lot. Reading spiritual works, especially sacred scripture, the catechism, and the lives of the saints. So if we want to know what a life of faith looks like and how it is lived out, we look to our heroes in the Bible, our heroes in the saints, and then, to actually the practicals, look into things like the catechism. We also have to seek the companionship of true believers, being around one another and trying to do this together. So a lot of those themes have just been constantly popping up through, how do we live a life of a Christian? You do the things that we've been talking about for the last 10 weeks and the last most of your lives that you've heard a lot of these things, right? Okay, hope. We hope in God's promise of a share in his glory in heaven. God's promises are trustworthy. Hope offers to us authentic joy and true courage and sustains us in times of trial. One of the biggest distinctions and kind of like breakthroughs that I had to have in my spiritual life was, I think it's the two definitions of the word in. I believe in God and I believe in God. And what I mean by that is like the first one being like, I believe that God exists. And that's kind of what we're saying in the creed. I believe in God. I believe that God exists, and these are all the things that we're going to say about him, right? But I think that next step is I believe in God like I believe in Donna that she's going to be consistently here every Monday hosting us in the house. Like that believing in, like it's that level of trust. And I believe in Jennifer that whenever she gives a talk that she's going to bring her A game, she's going to do the best that she can. That sort of belief in, right? So there's this belief in that they exist. That one's easier because you can physically see them, right? But it's this hope of I really believe in who God is, that all of his promises are true. Okay. So the nature of hope is to know that the story of salvation ends in victory. We didn't get to the end of the story of salvation because we were on a clock limit a few weeks ago. But ultimately, the story ends with us seeing Jesus, whether that is our death or we happen to be here at the time that he decides that he's going to come back. Either way, our life ends with seeing Jesus, right? And the story of salvation ends in victory for those of us who are believers, right? Because we all want and are built for heaven, which means that we are built for the eternal and we're built for happiness. Because what is heaven? Eternal happiness, right? So if we are built for heaven, we're built for eternity and we're built for happiness. We know that our bodily well-being and existence will not last. Not only will we die, but there will be suffering, later in life, but also throughout our lives, right? We can all get sick. We can all have strife. We can all have struggles. Ultimately, our entire lives is we are seeking a happiness that is permanent, right? And a lot of times people I think in like Catholic circles, some people would like to push back against the idea that we are made for happiness, right? Because I think a lot of times we hear that and we think of like the Joel Osteens of the world, right? Where if you just believe in God and give me all your money, then you'll be rich and happy and all these things, right? But that's kind of a distortion of something that is true. We are built for happiness. Does that mean that we are going to experience that every single day? No. But it's what we desire because it is what we were built for in the next life, right? And we get to experience that joy and happiness in the sacraments, in our prayer, in the, being with our families, being with our kids. Like these things in our life are experiences of this ultimate love, joy, happiness that we will experience forever in heaven, right? So we get tastes of it, but it's not complete here on earth. Christian hope is the confident expectation of a future of happiness with God. It responds to the desire of happiness that God placed on our hearts, and it centers on God and on what he promised and can deliver. So what are the consequences of hope? That was their wording. I was like, what do you mean consequences of hope? Yeah, but they have some good answers. So if you're intrigued as I was, here we go. The consequences of hope. If we are a hopeful people, these are the consequences. It puts our priorities in order. Our relationship with God and attaining eternity are our purpose in life, right? So if we are going to have hope in eternity, it may change our priorities a little bit, right? Where I know for a lot of us, work and daily tasks and those sorts of things can kind of creep into that first spot every now and then, if not more than every now and then, right? When God ultimately is that, we'll put our priorities there. Because essentially when we're working, it's, a lot work is good. God created work and work is good, right? But if we are working and constantly only focused on things on this world, then we're missing out on preparing and experiencing the next, right? Not that those things are bad, but it just puts our priorities in check by looking to heaven. Hope buoys us up amid the difficulties in life. Because unlike, the Joel Osteens of the world, we as Catholics acknowledge that there's going to be suffering in life, right? We all know that from personal experience, and the church has never shied away from suffering. The problem of pain, the problem of suffering is one of the biggest arguments that non-Christians have against Christianity, and the Catholic Church has never shied away from that. Like we have Jesus on a crucifix as our primary symbol, right? And it's this focus on where is Christ in our suffering? He's on the cross. He's suffering with us, right? He's not this God up in the sky that's just like, hey, it would be kind of fun to watch them struggle today. That's not what it is, right? Where is God in the suffering? And kind of there's like the silly sufferings of like, oh, my baby woke me up and I probably need to be the one to go get the baby. But then there's the real sufferings of this family strife and the struggles and loss and those sorts of things, right? This real struggle. Where is Jesus in that? He's on the cross suffering with us, right? And through his suffering, he bought us the opportunity for eternal happiness, right? Where there will be no more suffering. Our problems here on earth are seen in a clearer perspective so that we don't become discouraged or feel abandoned by God. Because in the midst of sufferings or bad things happening to us, hope is the thing that says, this type of thing has happened before, if not to me, to many, many other people. And this is what's going to get us. What's going to get me through is God and my relationship with him and my hope that things will be better in this life and the next. Another one of the consequences of hope is that spiritual difficulties are seen as steps on our journey to holiness and heaven, as opposed to if we lack hope and we're feeling like dry in our spiritual life of like, oh, I used to be holy, or I used to pray better, or I used to, be able to serve more, whatever the thing is for you with your faith. If we have hope, the lens that we look through that as is, oh, yeah, I am struggling right now. But this is another step in my journey towards God, right? Instead of, oh, I'm walking away from God, right? And kind of getting into that despair. We can turn to the Holy Spirit for help and grace rather than rely on our own strength. If we hope in God, then we don't have to just muster it up on our own strength, right? Our own, I'm just going to, pull myself up by my bootstraps and be a holy person, right? No, the hope is knowing that the only way that I'm ever going to grow in holiness is with the help of God, with the help of the Holy Spirit. Okay, sins against hope. This one was fascinating for me because it's another one of those pendulums that y'all know I like, right? Sins against hope. Despair manifests as a disbelief in the attainability of heaven and a grave distrust of the Almighty, his love for us, his goodness, justice, and mercy, right? So despair is a sin against hope. And it's kind of the opposite of presumption, which we'll get to in a second. But despair is a sin against hope because it's essentially saying like, oh, those other people can go to heaven, but I've done too much bad. Or I haven't been, I'm 50 years old. I've never been involved in church before. Those other people, they can go to heaven, but I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not whatever. Insert the thing here, right? And that leads to a grave distrust of God because we're not trusting that God said, even when we know that we are sinners, God says, I love you anyway, right? On the other side of that pendulum, a sin against hope is presumption. Essentially the opposite kind of person of sin, a belief that we have saved ourselves and I'm doing great. I'm praying every day. I'm going to church all the time. It's this presumption on too much on the side of, that once saved, always saved kind of thing, right? I donated that $500 to the parish festival. I'm good to go for heaven, right? It's that idea that we don't need divine assistance. It's an overindulgence in self-sufficiency, right? So we're presuming either on God's love and mercy or presuming on our own strength, right? Either way, we're missing that virtue of hope. And then finally, the last thing on hope is that hope fosters prayer, the desire to see the Father. Because if our hope ultimately is heaven, that is complete union with God. Heaven is that complete union with God. Prayer is the way that we can access that now, right? Where we can have this union with God here on earth. All right, the game started. I think that's what that was. Love. All creation is an act of God's love. We were created by love and for love. You might have heard it worded like that before, right? We were created by love. God, the creator, that trinity of persons in loving community, created us so that we could respond to his love and share that love with one another. The primary thing on love that I bolded here, I'm not going to talk too long about love because I think we kind of get it, right? But Jesus commanded us to love. The greatest commandment, right? Love God, love your neighbor. We've all heard that a bunch of times. The part that I think I miss pretty often is that Jesus can command us to love, which is weird. Because if I commanded Jennifer to have an emotion right now, it'd be very difficult. Be sad, or like be happy or be angry. It's a hard thing to do, right? You can't command emotion. And a lot of times we see love as an emotion, right? I'm feeling loving towards this person, or I love my spouse, or whoever, right? But Jesus commands us to love, which means that it's not an emotion, it's an act of the will, it's a choice, right? So whenever we feel, just because we feel like we want to be unloving towards somebody doesn't mean that we get to, right? Because we have been commanded. If I'm angry at somebody or I'm frustrated with somebody, it doesn't mean I get to just do whatever I want, right? Because there is that idea, and we'll get to justice here in a second. There's that idea of justice, right? Of like sometimes people deserve something. But that whole idea is, I love it as a comic books fan. We talked about Avengers earlier. The first Avenger is the Lord. In the Old Testament, I love it as a comic books fan. The Lord is the first Avenger, right? Where vengeance is His. So if we often want to be the judge, jury, and executioner, right? Whenever we might just be the person that reported it to the good old judge up there, right? And let him have his judgment. So I just love that both for both parts of the greatest commandment. That there are times, and by times I mean about 24 hours most days, that I don't feel like praying, right? I don't feel like it. I don't often have a desire to pray. But love isn't the feeling of like, I feel like I want to pray now. Like when I get the feeling to pray, it's like a special occasion. I'm like, oh, this is nice, But it's an act of the will to choose to go to read the scriptures, to choose to continue to go to mass, to choose to sit down and shut off my phone and pray, right? It's an act of the will. So no matter how we're feeling, it's a choice over an emotion. Okay, really quickly, the cardinal virtues, the 4 key human virtues. These are prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. All of the other virtues are based on these 4 categories, right? So there's a bunch of other virtues, and they're all under these four categories. So the cardinal virtues build on our nature. The human virtues are given supernatural life by God's grace. So the theological virtues are these gifts infused in us, right? The cardinal virtues are things that we have naturally as human beings, right? And the more that we exercise them, and the more that we desire to grow in them, yes, we can also ask God to give us this gift, but we can do our part too. And we'll see that as we go through them. The cardinal virtues, the cardinal comes from the Latin word for hinge. They are the pivot points, the things that are all of the other human virtues hinge on, right? That's that old cardinal meaning. So prudence, what prudence is human wisdom in action. Prudence helps the intellect to see what is right to do. My favorite part of prudence is that it enables the application of moral principles to particular cases. So I've used I can't do it now because my birthday stuff's up there. But I've used this fake whiteboard of like, hey, we have knowledge about this in Catholicism. We have knowledge about this. We have knowledge about that. We have all this scattered knowledge, right? But then sometimes we have to come to choices that we have to make a moral choice. Like one example, we won't get into all the details, but one example was like, can I go to a wedding for a person that's not Catholic? Can I go to a wedding for a person of a different religion? Can I go to a same-sex union marriage, right? When it comes to moral questions, we have to be, like, what we're using is our prudence, where we can take all of this knowledge that can kind of seem random and kind of sporadic, and we're able to apply it to a real-life situation where we need to make a decision, right? So that's what prudence, this gift of prudence does. So we grow in it by, one, building up our knowledge so that we have the knowledge to pull from whenever we need to make these decisions, but also consistently making those decisions, having good counsel whenever you need to make big decisions. Justice regulates our dealing with other people, with others. So justice, all this comes down to is the whole give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's, right? That Jesus said. What is God do? What do we need to give to God? We need to give him our love. We need to give him our hearts, our minds, our time, our 10%, whatever it is, right? Those are the things that we need to give to God. What do we do to other people? Respecting them, fostering peace, harmony in the human family. Essentially, it's justice is what is right, and we know what is right. And it's that whole idea of just like the example of waking up in the middle of the night and the baby's crying. We know the right thing to do, and we just need to do it. And then finally, the last two are temperance and fortitude. Temperance moderates our dealings with ourselves and the pleasures of life. Temperance regulates our pursuit of pleasures, avoids excess, and keeps our desires honorable. Temperance promotes the will's mastery over instincts. We've been kind of giving y'all updates about Donna trying to help me lose weight, right? Like this has been a thing, right? Temperance, like I've had to grow in temperance, and it's this idea of like my instinct is just to eat because it makes me happy, right? But I have to make a decision of the will of I'm going to eat a salad, or I'm going to get the grilled chicken instead of the fried chicken, or I'm going to eat at home instead of eating out, right? I'm not going to eat late. Like those are decisions of the will that I can promise you go against every instinct that I have in my body. Like that's all I want to do is just eat, right? So temperance is that gift, right? It's a virtue that God can help me with, but there's also things that I can do to help that, right? The more times that I say no to the bad food, the easier it is for me to say yes to the good food, right? Fortitude is strength in adversity. Fortitude controls our natural inclination to avoid difficulties and hardships and to face trials. We are strengthened to resist temptation, overcome obstacles, and conquer fear in the face of risk, persecution, and pain, and enabled to renounce or sacrifice our lives for our faith or just cause. So essentially, this TV show that I watched, it was a father and a son talking to each other. And the son was like, he didn't feel, they were about to go to battle. There's just like the old knight show, right? They're all knights in their shining armor and their swords. And the son was going into his first battle. And he looks to his dad. He's like, I'm terrified. And he's looking at his dad, and his dad's this war general, and he's super calm. And he says, how are you so confident? How are you so courageous? He said, I'm scared out of my mind. I edited it for y'all. He's very scared, right? He said, the only time that you can be courageous is in a time where you have to choose it, right? As a warrior, it's not courageous to just do push-ups and your curls and practice your with a wooden sword, right? It's courageous to go to battle. And that's where this fortitude comes in, right? It's like things are kind of nice, and I think we're having an enjoyable evening, right? Like it's kind of nice to be a Christian at the Hannes' house on Monday evenings, right? But what happens when something bad happens later this week, right? It's that fortitude, that courage that's going to get us through. The last thing that I want to talk about tonight is this idea that I hadn't heard about until probably 3 or 4 years ago, and it is almost not defined, but it has completely revolutionized how I look at my moral life. And maybe this will apply to some of you guys, and maybe it won't. But it's this idea of moral licensing. Has anybody ever heard of moral licensing? Heard of it? Yeah. I think that it's the place that I struggle with the most, and the place that I'm focusing on growing over the last few years. Moral licensing is essentially the idea of, and you can apply this to anywhere. You can apply this to human things. You can apply this to spiritual things, right? It's the idea of, I've been eating very well this week, so I can order DoorDash at 10 o'clock on Friday. That's like my treat, right? And now, granted, sometimes you can do that, right? But then I started doing it, and then I started ordering Saturday, then I started ordering Sunday, right? It's this whole idea of I did the right thing for so long that I can slip up a little bit here, right? So those are the human examples, but it's like prayer. I did it forever. I worked in the church. We were forced to pray every day. So then when somebody wasn't forcing me to pray every day, I was like, well, I prayed every day for 5 years. I can go a day without praying. And that day became a couple days and 3 days. And then I was praying 1 out of 6 days a week, or 1 out of 7 days a week, 2 out of 7 days a week, or whatever, right? that moral licensing, I think, really catches me, and I think it catches a lot of people, right? Of I have done the good thing, so I can now do this quote unquote bad thing, right? I gave a lot of money at the church, so I have the right to whatever, right? There's all these examples of I have done the good and correct thing, and I've been persistent in it. So I'm now giving myself permission to do this thing that I shouldn't. And there could be silly human examples like with the diet and that sort of thing. But when it comes to prayer and sin, I do it all the time with sin. Oh, I didn't do my quote unquote favorite sin for like 2 weeks. What does it really matter if I do it today? Last time I only went 3 days without doing it. Look at me, I've not done it for 2 weeks, right? So that idea of moral licensing is essentially just like, look at me, I'm so good, and then you fall. Again, where did I mention God in that whole thing? Nowhere, right? It was all about me. And it was like me trying to do it on my strength, right? So whether it's the theological virtues or just asking, God, please more. He's already given it to you. He's already given you everything you need to live a life of faith, hope, and love. God, help me. Give me more of this. Help me to live it out. The cardinal virtues, continuing to ask God to help you with those. But what are the practical things that you can do to grow in temperance, grow in fortitude, those sorts of things, right? So the homework for the week is very simple. The homework for the week is to look at those, seven. That's seven. I was trying to do it on both hands and I got confused. Look at those seven.
You did anyway.
I couldn't decide which one. I couldn't decide if I want to do 4 and 3 or 3 and 4 and then 5 and 2, and I got very confused. Those virtues, the ones we talked about tonight. To look at those virtues and focus on one of them this week. So when we all gather back next week, we'll all have one that we can talk about in our small groups or whatever, right? But if nothing else, at least one that you were able to focus on this week of where do I need to grow, right? And I would imagine that as you listened, you were like, oh, I'm pretty good at these. Oh, I need to work on this one, right? Where's that one that you need to grow? And just take that to prayer. It's the most ambiguous homework I've given you so far, right? Think about it, pray about it, ask God for an increase in that, in one of those 7 virtues we talked about tonight. And then if anything comes to mind of like an action thing, right? So like for me with the temperance thing, it's like saying no to, like I could probably count, 35 restaurants between here and my house that I could stop at on the way home, right? Temperance is making the decision of, and I've done this quite a few times, of like, I'm not going to go out to eat for a week, right? And see how it goes, right? So that's the thing. Which one is it? Ask God in prayer for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you want to do. And then if an action item comes up, what's that action item that you can do this week? Thank you guys for watching today's video. Hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit subscribe. It would just really help us, but it also help you make sure that you do not miss next week's video. Also, we have a weekly podcast right here on the channel. Me and some of my best friends getting together every week to talk about faith and how it applies to just our everyday normal interactions. We also have some more in our speaking series, our speaking playlist, and we've got some music. We've got our pop culture series called A Catholic Perspective, where we look at some of our favorite videos, movies, songs, TV shows, that sort of thing through a Catholic lens. So make sure you check those out. I hope that you enjoy them. If you did enjoy today, let us know what you thought in the comments. What was your favorite part? What are some questions that you have? What was something that really stuck out to you? That would just really help us to stay engaged with you and make sure that we're delivering what you need and what you would like. So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next week.